Let's take a look at the units and their characteristics and capabilities. There are many different scenario designers, so things will vary from scenario to scenario based on the designer and the scale and scope. You can see the designers are scrolling by here, so you can see how many different ones there are. So like I said, things will vary. I'm just going to give you a general overview here to give you an idea about the units and their characteristics. Let's left click on a unit, this infantry division, and you can right click on it to bring up this drop down menu, different things to do. You can also hit U on the keyboard, that'll bring up this unit report box. This tells us that this particular unit is untried, and that means it has not been in combat yet. The first time it is in combat, its proficiency rating could change by up to 25% from this, what it's been set at. Once a unit has been in combat, it switches over to veteran status, and then its proficiency won't change from what it's set at until it gets in combat, and then it has the possibility of going up by 1% for each combat that it's in. So that's important, because if you have a force that's made up mostly of untried units, you don't know exactly what their proficiency is going to be, and obviously higher proficiency units are of better value in combat. You also have an attack and defense strength showing along with the movement, and the readiness and supply values, which vary depending on how much you move and how much combat you're involved in. The unit is calculated as having these anti-armor and anti-personnel values, and the defense is the same, the defense factor the same as there. It has an artillery capability because it has these howitzers in it, but it has no range. It's not a ranged unit, so it can't actually fire at other units. Ranged units are artillery units. So because of the scope and scale of this scenario, it's a whole division that's going to be contained in one hex. It keeps to itself. It doesn't go like an artillery unit firing at range, as opposed to this unit here, which is a railroad artillery unit. You'll see that in this report up here, it has a range of 3. It also tells you that here, so it can fire out at ranges. So let's take a look at this, the equipment in this unit. All these slots on the left are all the equipment, and the first number here is the on hand at the moment, and the second number is the maximum it can have for that equipment. Obviously, movement and casualties will cause this first number to drop, and replacements will get it to go back up. Now, it's not necessary to keep all this in mind, or to know all this, or to go through all the different units to figure out what equipment they have in them. This isn't a tactical game, it's an operational game. This, you could just go about like any other normal war game, pitting your infantry divisions against the enemy's infantry and whatever other units that are there. So you'll see, for instance, in this one, this is an anti-aircraft unit. It has mostly 88 flak guns. It's not an infantry unit made for frontline combat, but it can come in handy as a support unit to add in to a combat. And if you come up against tanks, of course, it'll come in handy for that. You have your air units, and they have different icons. Bomber icon here, fighter bomber icon here, and fighter icon here. And you can see the same thing. You can get a readout on the equipment that's in it and the different capabilities that it has. This bomber unit, different capabilities it has. You can change the air missions from here, and the loss settings I'll get into in a separate tutorial on loss settings, because that has more to do, these loss settings have more to do with the combat phases. Over here you have the monkey wrench button, your inventory and replacements. Gives you what you have currently on hand, at what rate you're getting this equipment, what turns. Some of these start later. As you can see there, this 75/8 tank gun doesn't start until turn 40. Some of them end, so they'll have that number there. You have these two assigned and lost columns. This is the amount of equipment that you have assigned to units right now, and this will display how many you've lost of each particular type of equipment. And it gives you all the equipment throughout the whole scenario for what you have. This button here will show you your expected reinforcements. These are any units that are scheduled to arrive or withdraw throughout the scenario. You can see here that some of them are the withdrawals. It's up to the scenario designer to decide if they want to tell you that that's happening or not in the news report that might come up every turn. Some scenarios will say, next turn you're going to lose these units, and some scenarios don't. So it's nice to take a look at this every now and then to see if anything's coming up, so that you're not surprised by withdrawals of units. In the unit display box up here on the upper right, you've got a icon here that will let you board a train, and you'll see at the bottom of the screen when I'm over this, it gives me the capacity required available. My unit weight that I've got selected now is 1605, and I have a possible 2000 for rail transport. So obviously if I board this guy and rail him somewhere, that's going to be about all I can move for this particular turn because of the low rail capacity. There's also, if it's available, there are two other buttons that could be up here in addition to that rail one. There could be the sea lift one if you're in a port for sea lift, and there could be the airlift one if you're on an airfield to be air transported. Let's take a look at the headquarters units. They have various capabilities depending on the equipment that's in them. Regardless of what the equipment is, though, they give a supply bonus to units that are in their hex or adjacent to them. So that's always constant. They could also have a range, and in this case you can tell if it's a ranged unit by this R right here. The infantry unit obviously not ranged, no R. Air units do have a range. So if an infantry unit if a headquarters unit has artillery in it, then it can fire out depending on its range. In this case, in this scenario, the designer put no artillery, so that's not a capability of this unit, and it really doesn't have any other capabilities that I can see other than giving that supply bonus. So the use in this scenario for these headquarters would be to keep them, say, next to the units so they get a supply bonus, and each corps in this scenario has its own headquarters. I'll talk about the formations in a formation tutorial. Each formation highlights itself as you go through, so you can see that as I click on the different units, the units of that formation are highlighted too. Another thing you see in some scenarios are these orange bars across the bottoms of units. That means that they're not available for orders. You can't move them, you can't attack with them. If you hit F on the keyboard, F for formation, it'll tell you right up top what's going on. This formation is considered to be in reserve status, and it activates on turn 4. F again takes you out of that. So these units aren't available until turn 4, and in this particular scenario there's another group up here, and again if you hit F, you can tell they're in this reserve status. They activate on turn 7. Some units might also have a gold or yellow bar across them. That means they're in garrison status, so you won't be able to use them. There's none in this scenario, so I can't show it to you, but the gold or yellow bar means that that they're not going to come out of status unless the scenario designer tells them to on a specific turn. The air units you'll see have a range and also a movement allowance. The movement of 100 means that they can move 100 hexes to another base. The range is their effective combat radius. So you'll see that the bombers can actually be more effective out farther than the fighters with a lower, shorter range could. There's also possibility of slews of other units that have different capabilities. Anti-tank unit that has anti-tank guns in it. A straight up artillery unit that has guns in it, has an artillery value and a range of 1 in this scenario because of the scale. You're not going to get too many that have a very far range other than these railroad guns. If you click on this button, it'll give you the statistics for this particular piece of equipment, which has a range of 55 kilometers, and then it'll tell you, well, in the game that's 3 hexes. It'll also give you the anti-personnel strength of the unit for the game system. That gets converted and scaled to each scenario. So in the scenario, it has a value of 3, even though you could say it's 46, but scaled to this scenario in relation to other units. That's what that number means. And again, there are other tutorials for these loss settings and having to do with the formation reports.